colleagues, Honorable Chairwoman, Professor, first of all, thank you very much for being asked to deliver this presentation. Nagyon sok külföldi kollégának legalább néhány mondatot szeretnék angolul mondani. Gondolkodtam rajta, hogy angolul vagy magyarul beszéljek, végül a magyarra szavaztam, úgyhogy az előadásomat magyarul fogom megtartani, hiszen nagyszerű tolmácsok vannak jelen, köszönjük szépen, de ettől függetlenül néhány mondatban angolul is szeretném Önöket köszönteni, és köszönöm szépen a meghívást.
Az én feladatom már, vagy az engem ért felkérés az az
I was asked to talk about children in alternative or so-called substitute care. And at the same time, as the first presenter of this session, I'd also like to talk in more general terms about what this alternative or substitute care and protection is fit into the New York Child Rights Convention. I am sure it has been widely discussed, quite rightly, that the New York Convention on the Children's Rights introduces a holistic approach in terms of children's rights. So it interprets all children's rights in their unity. And in that sense, the fact that a child is growing up in alternative care, substitute care, is again a topic that is in certain chapters of the convention is mentioned. However, they need to be interpreted in the context of the rest of the sections. When it comes to substitute care, the convention stipulates that children who cannot be brought up in their own families must be placed under the substitute care of the state, and it's the obligation of the state to offer and provide such substitute care to such children. However, the rest of the chapters are totally inseparable from this concept, and here I'm contradicting myself, but I like to highlight the protection of the primacy of the protection of children's interests, the ban on discrimination, and I'm sure we will discuss that widely, because I am sure we will talk about children who are invisible in some sense, including some vulnerable groups, children living with disabilities, or children that are deprived of their family environment for some reason. And at this point, I'd like to just say one sentence about why this is a particularly difficult topic, is that the fact that a child is deprived of its or his or her family environment covers a number of different life situations. There are parents who do not want to care for their children, because there are children who are abandoned ultimately by their parents, but there are also children who may not be abandoned by their parents, but the quality of the care provided by the parents is such that a moment comes for the state authorities when it becomes obvious that such children must be lifted out of the families, and this is one of the most sensitive issues at play.
Sajátos az, ahogy ezeknél a gyermekeknél most még annál
still staying with the situations where children are staying with their families, there are different children's rights at play competing with each other sometimes. These children's rights are about the fact that sufficient security and well-being is to be provided to the child. And there are also rights about the autonomy of children.
A gyermekeknek is különösen fontos az.
Obviously, it's also particularly important for these children to be able to have their voices heard, to make statements, to express their opinions, but at the same time, there is no doubt that sufficient security must also be provided to them. There is a thought in the Convention on Children's Rights which stipulates that, well, if parents do not wish so or support the idea, children cannot be lifted from the family. Obviously, the intention is to protect the family together, but of course the convention immediately adds that there is an exception, and the exception is that unless it's required in the best interest of the child. It's a repetition of the content of Chapter 1, which says that the utmost interest of the child must be a primary consideration. In such very sensitive situations, when children are lifted from the family, it's not easy at all to judge what it is that serves the utmost children of the child. This utmost interest is a concept that is not defined in the New York Convention on Children's Rights or in the general commentary on this convention, because it's a concept that is defined case by case for specific children. This raises the next question, which is an absolutely general thought about the convention, that we generally protect children's rights for all children. So when we talk about children's rights, they also cover other children, but there are certain rights that pertain particularly to certain groups of children, like vulnerable children, children in situations that pose a danger to them. But ultimately, when it comes to taking children from the family and when it comes to surrogate care, they must be applied in the context of the child in question. And there is not much protocol, international protocol in place for what needs to be regarded as the utmost interest of the child. Another key issue that must also be mentioned as a general topic here is that when it comes to decisions like taking the children out of the family and placing the child under alternative care like surrogate parents, etc., or children's home, residential home, well, the question arises as to how much the views of the child can be considered and how much children can make a statement in such matters. So that's one question. And the other question that arises is how this can be sufficiently explained to the child, because of course the child has a right to be fully informed of all issues that have an impact on them. So it's not possible to remove a child from the family and place them elsewhere without being sufficiently informed, which is actually not an easy matter, because obviously the idea is not to take the child from their parents forever. And of course, such alternative care can have also a temporary nature. And as much as possible, we want to provide care that would allow them to go back to their families. So we need to manage children in a very sensitive way and explain things in a way that is matched to the child's age, mental and physical state of health. So we need to explain why they are being taken away from their families and how we can find a solution for making sure that ultimately they can get back to their parents. As I mentioned before, Well, there are two issues that I like to highlight about children who are in alternative care. The first situation is, as I said, when the child is still in their own family, whether it's a blood family, an adoptive family, or a step-parent family, step-family. So there are certain actions to be taken. And a moment might come when the child must be taken out of the family and cared for, and as soon as state care kicks in, certain means must be involved and the options available must be looked at. According to the approved approach under the concept of children's rights, we try as much as possible to prevent children being removed from their families. We want children to grow up in their families as much as possible. And for that, we need to help the families themselves, which is not an easy issue at all, because you need to keep in mind that every family wants to bring up that child, but even that is not necessarily true, because there are certain families that, after all, don't want to bring up the child. So that, again, is a very sensitive area. We must find answers to how we can help parents, with the parents accepting the help, and on the other hand, how can they become suitable for accepting and correctly using such help. The relevant international literature sets out different ways of helping families in this situation, and they are also reflected in the Hungarian legislation as well, although sometimes in a slightly different wording. But one level of this help is to provide certain services to parents that can help them bring up children. That's the bottom layer of care. Here, parents get substantial help that promotes the appropriate bringing up of children. And in addition to the provision of services, there is another major social issue that can be of relevance, which is the issue of communication and conflict resolution. It's generally discussed points when it comes to the protection of children as to what kind of parenting skills are possessed by parents that would allow them to approach and bring up the child in the right way. And it would appear that they mostly need some kind of education and support in this field. Not every parent has these skills. That is called by positive parenting in international literature. It's an approach to the child, a way of handling the child that would bring a good outcome to both the parent and the child. And although it would appear, or there is a belief, that parental skills are had by all parents, that's not quite true. It's a very interesting question, actually. And when it comes to adoption, the adoptive parents are typically prepared for parenting. There are certain toolkits, courses that allow adoptive parents to become good parents. And those who are not adoptive parents but natural parents, such course or support is not available. And it might well be that a lot of people would be put off by the idea They wouldn't understand why natural parents would need such education, because being a parent is the easiest thing in the world, because humanity survived through parents. There are many parents and children do grow up, so there is a kind of ingrained skill. However, at the same time, we must also see that it's not that easy for parents to keep up with the challenges of the modern world. And just to mention a specific example, well, we have here the challenges of digital society. What we see is that parents cannot provide sufficient help to children about what digital knowledge is, what the internet involves, even though they are the parents. So they should have the right skills. And when it comes to alternative protection, we are not talking about digital skills, of course. There are more basic skills lacking here. It would also be helpful to offer an advisory service to parents, and the Hungarian care system offers such services. We have family and child well-being services that are available to parents, and literature also talks about the importance of training specialists. So it must also be obvious to specialists what kind of help is required or needed by parents. And you must also understand that parents must be approached with sufficient caution, because being a parent is a unique state of mind. And my profession is not an aid, a helping profession. I'm a lawyer, but I also understand that I cannot simply approach parents by saying, come here and I help you because you don't know what to do, and I do. Because all parents feel that being a parent is a unique quality, so we need to approach the matter in a very sensitive and skillful way if we wish to connect with parents. So taking children out of the family can be prevented by investing quite a lot of resources and energy, but if it cannot be prevented ultimately, then there are other layers in the system where the state can help children. And that's no different in the Hungarian system either, because the first such authority action would be a placement under protection, and it's only after this that the child needs to be lifted out from the family and placed under the care of the state. And we also understand that children can be taken out of the family temporarily if urgent action is required due to the endangerment of the child. And once the child is under alternative care, then it's important to do that in view of their individual needs, in view of the specific situation of the child in question. It's rather self-explanatory that it's only the final choice. And as long as we have other ways, we must not lift children out of the family. It's also important to make sure children stay in sufficient contact with their blood family, so the child needs to be accommodated in a way that ensures this connection. Children's rights literature makes a distinction between formal and informal care systems and the options they offer. In the informal system, Well, the informal system doesn't sound so dear to the heart of a lawyer, even though it can help in specific life situations. They are more difficult to assess from a legal point of view. But there are also certain formal options that allow children to stay in their own families one way or another, even if not with their own blood family. And in Hungarian law, we call it acceptance into another family. And if the wider family is not available, there are no grandparents, uncles, aunts where the child could be placed, or ones that are able and willing to care for the child, there we need to find a surrogate parent or place the child in an institution. And an institution under Hungarian law is a secondary choice. As much as possible, we must keep the child in the family, and the alternative care must be such that is closest to the traditional family setup. That's the traditional surrogate parent care. And if that is not available, then we have options that the so-called apartment homes that offer accommodation in smaller groups. And the aftercare is also part of this system, because if children spend too many years in this alternative specialist care system, they will have a higher need for being prepared for adult life. And ultimately, if they can be placed back into their blood family before they reach adulthood, then we do that. But for that, again, we need to help and support the blood family. In conclusion, I would say, going back to general children's rights issues, is that we can only have the right conclusions in any country if we have research that allows us to have a better understanding of these children, and that involves a collection of data and some research work. Thank you very much for your attention, and I do apologize for having to leave. I couldn't shift my university lessons. Köszönöm szépen a figyelmet. Biztos vagyok benne, hogy sikerült megérteni a tolmácsolást, és megpróbáltam nem konkrétan az itteni gyermekgondozásról, hanem az általános kérdésekről beszélni. Elnézést kérek, hogy el kell mennem, az egyetemi óráimat nem tudtam más időpontra helyezni, hiszen a vizsgai időszak előtti időszak már a végéhez közeledik, úgyhogy ezzel meg is köszönném a figyelmüket. Nagyon szépen köszönöm.